Oh, whoa, we're on.
Okay. That happened.
Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. It's Eric, right? Sir Eric of Eastman.
I don't know. There might be some question in the
What the
room
hell
as
did
to
you do with
whether or
your
not.
fingernails?
Oh, it was. It was a tractor accident. We'll get into that later. I don't like to talk about it even now.
That's really
Welcome
artistic.
to Rock, Paper, Hand
Artistic
Grenades.
is a nicer way of what I was thinking of saying.
Okay.
It's a lot nicer.
The show,
So,
the show where you think you know what's going to get said, and it never does.
No, it doesn't. Because I always forget what I think I was going to say. For one, routinely. Greg Moore is the Grand Flamage of America for Prosperity in New Hampshire. What is it? I screwed it up. Anyway,
Grand fromage.
Grand Flamage.
Big cheese.
Big cheese.
Big cheese.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's the rumor.
That's the rumor. And so I thought it was kind of cool to have you on tonight because we're doing, I'd like to do a little bit about Thanksgiving and how the Americans for Prosperity mindset kind of dovetails into the story of the Pilgrims. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they started out with this pact. It was going to be beautiful because everybody was going to work together and everybody had an equal share and everybody had an equal share of the produce or whatever they made. So what happened?
Well, first of all, I think you have to understand is that the Pilgrims, by and large, and I say this as someone who was born and raised in Boston, so you get the spoon-fed as a kid.
Yeah.
But the Pilgrims came as religious dissidents. They weren't quite getting the support, and they were getting a little too much pushback for their religious beliefs in England, and they took the opportunity to go colonize somewhere else where they wouldn't be harassed for their religious beliefs. But their religious beliefs had ideals that many of us would describe as at least socialistic, if not communistic, meaning that basically give on to what your abilities are and take based upon your needs. It didn't embrace any sort of like the free market ideals that we associate with our founding fathers, meaning what happened roughly 150 years later. So certainly there was a lot of change that took place between the initial ideals and when the rubber meets the road, and ultimately those ideals sort of hit the very bedrock of reality, and people understood that human nature doesn't always work best in an environment where you can't benefit from the fruits of your own labor.
Right. Yeah. If I work, like you said, you work a zillion hours a week or whatever. If somebody like you works really, really hard, and we're all going to get the same amount from no matter who worked. We got line. I was rambling anyway. Want to pick up the phone?
Sure. We've got Eddie on line one. Eddie, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hey, Eddie. Thanks for joining the conversation. So early in the show, too. We must have said something that really got you thinking,
huh? Great show tonight. Great guests and all. I want to ask. I'm going to ask a quick question of all three of you.
Yep.
And I'm going to hang up listening and answer. And it ties in with tonight's show, actually. Okay.
Very good.
All right. I'm going to take it from 1624 to I think it is to 2018. Right. And here's my quick question for all three of you. Where do we go from here? Where does the Republican Party go from here? Where do we go? How do we dust ourselves off? What's our message? And I hope it's a concise message. I know it's liberty, right, and all this, but it's also, to me, it's also law and order and the rule of law and accountability. Mm-hmm. Okay, it kind of ties in with tonight's show, but I just would like you three to kick that around a little. I'll tell you what, I'll hang up and I'll look for your answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks for asking, Eddie. Thanks for calling in.
You're up at bat.
Well, certainly, I think that you look at both at the state and the national level. And I think it's, in many cases, it's almost like a tale of two cities. You look at the state level where, frankly, we've seen a lot of huge successes, both advances in liberty as well as advances in basically economic success. We've made a number of steps forward in terms of reducing regulatory burdens, lowering taxes on employers, things like that have kickstarted our economy into hyperdrive. And that fundamentally is a very popular theme. However, our elections have become thoroughly nationalized.
Right.
People, frankly, and I think a lot of it has to do with the breakdown of the local news media and just how little coverage a lot of things get at the state level, and we're constantly get beamed in a lot of what's going on at the national level. And at the national level, the last few years, and not just after 2016, but the last probably 8 or 10 years have been incredibly dysfunctional. And there's a lot of anger and resentment that exists across the country at what's going on in Washington. And people have every right to be upset about what's going on in Washington. The things that are coming out of Washington in many ways are impacting our lives negatively. Look at healthcare. Healthcare is a mess right now at the federal. It's just a mess. And people have a right to be upset about the fact that healthcare has been monkeyed around with and tinkered with in a way that's made it unaffordable and quality is dropping. And you look at a number of the other regulations that are coming out of Washington, they're making our lives harder and harder. And it's caused sort of this tribalism to take effect. At the state level, both of you have served in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. It's amazing how there's so much less tribalism. Part of it is the fact that you guys get paid $100 a year, and if they want to throw you out, you'll go back to doing something that's really exciting. But there's a lot less tribalism there. You feel like you can work with your counterparts regardless of what party they're in. And it's kind of interesting that we see that a lot of the negativity that's rolled out of Washington is really impacted at the state level where things had been working very well. So I think it's really important for people at the national level to realize that it can't just be World War I trench warfare. Every 2 years we go back and forth. The House goes Republican, but the Senate stays Democrat. Then the Senate goes Republican, but the president's still Democrat. Then the House, Senate, and the House, Senate, and the presidency go to the Republicans. Now the House goes back to the Democrats. This feels like World War I trench warfare, where speaking of hand grenades, people would pull a pin on a hand grenade, throw it, in the hopes that maybe it would fall into the other guy's trenches and blow some of them up. That's unfortunately what we're seeing right now in Washington, and it's unhelpful because at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is try to improve people's lives. Oftentimes we have very different visions about where we go from one area to the other. And in terms of messaging, I think we have to sort of get past the acrimonious tribalism. If we're going to start having conversations about how we make things work better, it's got to start with people actually engaging in dialogue. But none of the institutions surrounding us are leading us in that direction. So organizations like AFP feel like we have to begin having those conversations to start broadening the dialogue, having a conversation about ideas and ideals and how that translates down to the policy level. And then fundamentally, that's how you start to build some common ground, because in Washington, there is no common ground, none whatsoever. You're either on Team A or Team Red or Team Blue, and that's the way it is. I really think that this is creating a massive disconnect, and whether it's your Republicans or Democrats, you have to start getting away from this sort of tribal viewpoint of simply saying, how can I get more of my people to show up, and how do I get the other guys less enthusiastic about showing up to vote? And to get there, we need to have a message that's more based on how we can improve people's lives, and then less about how can we stick it to the other guy.
Is the only solution to this binary system that we have, Republicans and Democrats, Team A, Team B, Yankees, Red Sox, shirt skins, whatever you want to call it, to try to spread a bit more of a cooperative spirit and communicative spirit amongst those two teams? Or could it possibly be the case that embracing a multi-party model to some extent might help to break up that paradigm? What's your take on that?
I don't know that it's necessarily about the parties per se. It has more to do with the institutions that are driving those individual decision makers, right? You look at, if you were to watch news today, if you were to watch MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News, or any of the many other channels that are out there, One America Network and all those, you would think that there was a holy war going on every day, and Americans are turned against Americans, and they're at each other's throats, whereas if you walk through the streets of Manchester, that's just not happening. So we have to create institutions outside of those institutions that are failed or failing. One thing that President Trump is right about is that the media is failing. The media is failing the citizens of the United States right now. and at the national level. And so there has to be other institutions that rise up to support the idea of actually bringing dialogue back to the conversation, start to actually have conversations. I'm sure in the Judiciary Committee, Gary, you've actually gotten some good ideas from Democrats and said
Yeah.
you've improved bills, and they've come up with good ideas. And even when you disagree with the bill, you'll say, let's see how I can make this bill better, even if I'm going to end up voting against it anyway.
Right.
But that's sorely lacking at the national level, and it's sorely lacking in the Institute of Government at the national level, and sorely lacking in the media at the national level, and sorely lacking, unfortunately, in our university system, which is supposed to be the place where people come together and have dialogue. When those institutions are failing us, I think this is a lot of what we're seeing as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of it. Is the institutions themselves have become occupied by people who are in the red camp or the blue camp. Period. I'll give you an example. I think it was New York Times or CNN today did an entire story on President Trump is thinking about investigating Hillary Clinton. Okay, now imagine this as a story. They have maybe inside information, maybe not, of President Trump is thinking about doing something.
How does
It's-
that even deserve ink?
Yeah, exactly. How is that even a story unless you are just trying to cast aspersions on Trump?
It's clickbait.
It's clickbait.
It's exactly
Everything
what it
is clickbait. That's actually one reason I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving tonight, is because I'll give you an example. And this is years ago, because my daughter's in her 30s now. But when she was little, she came home, and I said, so what's Thanksgiving about, honey? She goes, that was to thank the Indians. I said, what? She says, they got together to thank the Indians. I says, no, honey, that's not. These are dyed in the wool, born again, cross carrying Christians. There's no way that they had the first Thanksgiving to thank the Indians. They might have thanked the Indians, but that's not why they had it, right? She goes, nope, and she's stubborn. She's a wicked stubborn.
I wonder
kid.
what she gets that.
I don't know. It's from her mom. So she wouldn't believe me. I had to pick up an encyclopedia that predates, was not from the 70s, so it was still okay. Well, no, I bet if you
What
pick
happened
up,
to our educational system in the 70s, Gary? That could possibly have
I know.
skewed the narrative.
I don't know. So I had to show her in an encyclopedia that the Pilgrims got together to thank God for taking care of them. Even though it had been very, very rough few years, they were still taking care of them. And it wasn't until she read that, then she believed me, which shows you how much credibility I have with your kids. And then she goes back to the teacher and says, why did you tell me that? She says, well, I'm not allowed to tell you the truth. So somehow, like for instance, there are people right now who are carrying banners with Antifa, carrying banners with communist flags on it. There's people that really believe communism is a good idea. So how do we get through to those people who have been obviously lied to since they were in first grade about what communism is, what capitalism is, and how, because obviously if you even give the most rudimentary example, light starts dawning on Marblehead, which is what I did to my nephew, I don't know how many years ago. I said, buddy, look at it this way. You work really hard for your grades, don't you? He goes, yeah. I says, what would happen if your teacher said, okay, everybody, some people are good at this, some people are not. We're going to take everybody's grade and split the difference and everybody gets a B. He goes, well, I wouldn't appreciate that. I worked really hard for my A's. Bingo. And guess what happens the next quarter?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that it doesn't matter what you make,
the average grade drops to a
the
C.
average grade's
Right.
to a C. Within a year, everybody's going to be getting D's and F's.
Right. And I think that you're right. It's in many cases a lot of the institutions are failing us, and until we either can create new institutions in order to build up this idea of dialogue and balanced views and just historical accuracy as a reality, it makes it a lot harder for people to socialism always sounds better in theory than it has in practice. I mean,
Yeah.
It does sound very nice. You
when
got to
people,
admit.
when it's amazing when you talk to people who truly believe in communism and socialism, and you point out Venezuela, which by the way, 10 years ago or so, they were hailing as an example. And now, of course, now that everything is failing in Venezuela. The most oil-rich country in South America it can't even get enough gas to fill people's tanks. And we have hyperinflation to the point where it does no good to have currency because by the time you get it and go to spend it, it's now worthless. You, of course, hear the argument you hear all the time. Well, they just didn't do it the right way. The problem is that they've had many opportunities to do it the right way, and other countries have had a number of chances to do capitalism the right way.
For generations
Yes,
on end.
and consistently, capitalism has not only resulted in better outcomes, better quality outcomes for everyone. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than anything else in history, and no aid program, no government mandate has ever lifted people out of poverty the way capitalism has.
Yeah.
But
And you look
devil's
at-
advocating, is it not the case that capitalism left unrestrained and under-regulated is just going to lead to another robber baron era of exploitation and malicious greed?
So it's important to understand what the role of government is in here, right? If capitalism allowed and people are actually operating within a free market institution, it works well. The problem is as Adam Smith wrote, when two businessmen get together, it is never for the benefit of the customer, right? So that's why we have things like antitrust laws in the U.S. government, because there is a natural tendency for some folks to try to monopolize, because once they monopolize, then they can start abusing their customers.
Yeah.
And once you lose that connection to your customers, you end up with a scenario where you can see predatory behavior. And that's where the government has to ensure that that predatory behavior is allowing competition, because what we see all the time is it's rampant. It's cronyism. As soon as a market entrant gets in, what do they try to do? They try to regulate the door to close it behind them and to guarantee themselves.
You see it at State House all the time with
You see
regulations.
it. You see it with
Plumbing and
occupational licensure is probably one of the greatest ones. But you will often see. Certainly at the federal level, will they try to box out any opportunity for competition? Look at the fight that the taxi industry nationally has put up against Uber and Lyft.
Oh,
They want to
absolutely.
try to box out any competition. So that's exactly where government has to step in and say, we have to make sure that there still is an opportunity for competition to flourish.
Yep.
And so the government does have a role in ensuring a free market. A free market and capitalism does not mean that we're allowing people to engage in predatory behavior that boxes out competition. As long as competition is around, look, if you're able to consistently make the better mousetrap, ultimately you should be able to consistently make the better mousetrap. But you shouldn't be able to make a good mousetrap and then stop everybody else from making mousetraps.
Right. Yeah, I think I put it this way, was that capitalism without morality is just as evil as communism. And in that, like for instance, during Karl Marx's era, there were little kids going down into coal mines working when they're like 8 years old and stuff like that, or losing their hands at a manufacturing plant, and just once they were disabled, they kicked them out because they were no use anymore.
Well, and that's
But I'm saying, let me
absolutely.
finish. So
Sorry.
my point was that if employers treated their employees morally, nobody would have any idea who Karl Marx is.
And that's frequently a byproduct of whenever we've seen this in our country, whenever we've seen an oversupply of labor, whenever we've seen vastly more labor than there are jobs. What happens? In other words, if an employer can replace you in a heartbeat, they start engaging in behavior that is not treating their employees as well, because they don't value them, because if you can't produce as well as the next person I can find on the street, I'm going to toss you out of here or treat you poorly. So the best solution to that are to engage in policies that allow for a constant, ongoing, strong economy. Right now, no employer can mistreat an employee, because how the heck are they going to replace them? I mean, it is so hard to replace. Right now in New Hampshire today, the New Hampshire Department of Employment Security released data showing that we have an unemployment rate of 2.1% in this state. There are 15,000
the only people without
unemployed
jobs.
and about over 25,000 open jobs. Now, there are skill mismatches and there's some geographical mismatches. And in fact, the good news is even up in Coos County, which is often hailed as a place that's not benefiting from the economy, saw their economy drop down to 2.4%.
Wow.
Which is a fantastic,
Which is really good.
great news for the people of the North Country. But I think it's important to understand that when you have an environment like that, employers can't abuse employees. They don't have the option of abusing employees because
Right.
they have nowhere else to go to get the labor that they need in order to be able to be productive. So I think it's as policymakers, we have a responsibility to continue to ensure that the economy is continuing to move forward and taking the steps forward. And obviously we now have to look at a new environment. What are the steps that at the state and the federal level might take place based upon the elections of what happened 2 weeks ago? What's going to happen with some of the policies that have helped to kickstart our economy into a boom economy? Moreover, I know at the national level there's a lot of concern about an economic slowdown, largely driven by policy from the Federal Reserve, who have been cranking up interest rates dramatically over the course of the last few months. And that has had the effects of putting the brakes on the economy at a substantial level. They think that a 4% economy is growing too fast, so they want to do what they can to slow that down. Obviously, President Trump has had some choice words about the Federal Reserve
I
as
love
a
the
result
fact
of
that
that.
he has choice
I don't
words.
understand the macroeconomic theories behind that thinking and those policy choices. At
Well,
the Fed level.
to be fair, they're thinking
make
they're
sense.
thinking that our interest rates were artificially low, and they were. Coming out of the 2001, right after 9/11 and the economic crash, when we basically dropped our interest rates almost to zero. In other words, we were almost at a point where the government was paying people to borrow their money.
So we were priming the carburetor to get the engine going.
Exactly.
Okay.
And at some point, someone should have taken a chance to allow interest rates to rise back up to a level where we weren't essentially paying banks to borrow our money. And the problem is all of a sudden the Fed has said, okay, we've been wrong all these years, so now we're going to get back to where we should have been, and they're doing it in such a rapid fashion that it's having a very negative impact, both not just in terms of the stock market, but also in terms of the ability of
Housing
small
starts
businesses, housing starts, mortgage lending, also other important factors like, for example, when a small business wants to go out and borrow money. It's
Yeah.
now more expensive for the business to borrow
Right.
that money, which makes it harder for people to capitalize, for a business to move forward and continue to grow. So moving this rapidly has had some pretty negative impact on our ability to continue to growth at the federal level. Good news is at the state level, because we're making steps to become more and more competitive as some of our regional neighbors haven't been taking those steps, we're starting to see our state overperforming what's going on both
do you
regionally and nationally.
Do you see the? Well, first of all, I want to whatever it is, want to tell you that you're absolutely correct about the New Hampshire's election was more about what was going federally than it was about the state.
No, there's no question.
I
These
know-
elections are nationalized for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well, the
know.
whole thing was a moratorium on voter frustration over what happened in 16. So,
Right.
and it had very little to do with regional issues.
No, like Victoria Sullivan got booted, Lisa Freeman got booted. They're wonderful ladies, and they were doing a great job. So why? Because they got multiple attack ads. I got attack ads saying that if I get elected, that I was going to attack Social Security. Well, we both know, because we're somewhat educated, that the state legislature has nothing to do with Social Security.
No
We do
impact
not
on-
govern Social Security.
But your
and
average
yet
voter doesn't know civics
they don't
anymore.
know, and they're just and there was so much money coming from out of state. I would say that Hollywood bought the New Hampshire election last November 6th.
Well, regardless of how it got there, the concern is what are the incoming majorities going to do from a policy perspective that could ultimately undermine the success we've had as a state?
He's got veto, though.
Well, certainly Governor Sununu can certainly veto, and I know that there's going to be an ongoing discussion over the next 2 years about whether or not the Republican in the House and the Senate can sustain the governor's vetoes. Because if they stop sustaining his vetoes, he'll stop vetoing things. But at a high level, can Governor Sununu single-handedly, in many ways, because he's got the veto pen, hold off a lot of these impulses by a number of the folks who got elected to substantially grow the role in the space of government? And that's an open question that we'll still have to watch and see. As you know, certainly our organization has worked hard to reduce taxes on employers. We had what was once among the highest business tax rates in the country, the third highest according to the Tax Foundation. Through the course of two pieces of legislation in 2015 and 2017, I know both of you supported those. That was brought down so that we're now at a tax rate that's actually the lowest in New England, and consequently, a lot of businesses in New England are shifting more of their operations to New Hampshire, which is why our jobs picture has exploded, and why we now have the highest net inbound migration in the Northeast. In other words, at a percentage basis, more people are moving to New Hampshire than anywhere else in the Northeast. People are voting with their feet. Can the governor stop some of the campaign promises of some of the incoming majority who said that they wanted to reverse this tax relief and go back to where we were? Some
of them want income tax and
Sure.
sales tax. They want
They're very
Absolutely.
candid about it.
Absolutely, and they want to substantially expand funding for a series of programs and do it not just on a one-time basis, but at a structural level. In other words, they want to structurally increase the state's expense in a whole host of programs, which, obviously there's a concern there because, as you recall, Gary, about a decade ago, we saw the same situation play out. And you were around in the 2011-12 House that had to basically turn off the music and pull the people down off of all the tables and get people, to basically get through their hangovers of the massive overspending that had taken place, and that was an unpleasant experience.
Yep.
And we'd rather not have to do it again.
And it made Republicans look bad because they had to compensate for what the Democrats did.
So the question is can the governor sort of hold back against some of the campaign promises and keep what's been working so well in place and allow it to continue to flourish, to allow New Hampshire to continue to benefit from these policies? Now, can he do it? Yes, he certainly can if he's willing to pull out his veto pen and the Republicans in the House and the Senate are willing to sustain his vetoes.
What do we got? 160 something.
I believe the House split is 233 to 167, and
So
the Senate is 14 to 10.
What do you need to override a veto?
You would need 134 would sustain a veto out of 400. So
134 votes.
One-third.
One-third will sustain a veto.
Will sustain a veto.
I see.
And in the Senate, 9 out of 24 will sustain a veto, and is
And we've got 14 seats.
14 to 10.
So we have more than enough Republicans to back up
in the House
government.
and the Senate, correct.
Not all Republicans are alike, but we shall see.
No,
We shall see.
but on stuff like that, usually we stay together pretty good.
We made some great gains. Both BET and BPT were dialed back a little bit incrementally in this last session, and that's why people are
that's
voting
not-
with their feet.
And
like you
that's
said.
not to say that the next 2 years is an absolute wash. There are still opportunities for important policy steps. Working with the new majorities, certainly in the criminal justice reform space, there are some areas where we can continue to move forward. I know that the bail reform passed last year. I know some opportunities to expand annulment reform and maybe even continue to decriminalize some things that have created some unnecessary incarceration, which of course is not only expensive, but obviously substantially limits the people who are involved in their ability to move forward in their life and their career. So
Get a lot of bipartisan activity with those types of causes as well. We've got Richard calling in, so we're going to invite Richard to our show. Richard, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Thanks for calling in. Can you hear us, Richard? Richard, welcome to our show. We're glad you called.
Hey, how's it going?
How are you, Richard?
I'm doing pretty good, you know. A lot of people don't like paying taxes, and it comes to where, you know, people who like are Republicans, Democrats, and everything else. So, you know, a lot of people don't like that, but it's this great guy, excellent personality in the politics field and stuff. His name is Mike Stars Riley, and everybody thinks he sucks.
Okay, and
What's your point?
Where can someone learn about this person? And we seem to have lost Richard,
I don't
who
know.
wanted to sing the praises of a guy whose first name is Mike, and the rest I didn't quite get. Riley something, but I'm not sure what his point was either.
I'm not sure there was a
That was-
question there.
Yeah.
Would you believe?
Would you
Would they-
believe, right?
Would you believe?
Would you believe?
But do you know, as I do, that that there appears not to have been a question there. So we thank you for joining the conversation, Richard. You know, and happy holidays to you. So where were we?
We're talking about stuff. Hey, so what do you think? I know the American Prosperity doesn't chime in on this, at least to the best of my knowledge. But there is speaking of whether Mr. Sununu the governor can hold back the tide, there's going to be a boatload of anti-gun legislation coming in the next month or so. That's most of which I think will pass the House easily.
And that's well, I wouldn't necessarily say easily. As you know, the move to eliminate the concealed carry permit was a bipartisan vote. There were Democrats and Republicans who supported the effort, as well as Libertarians, who supported the effort to eliminate the requirement that you get a permit in order to carry concealed. I think that it'll be interesting. Certainly, a lot of the folks north of Lake Winnipesaukee, where obviously gun ownership rates are higher, might not necessarily fall directly in line with sort of the viewpoint that a lot of people view nationally, that Democrats are consistently opposed to the Second Amendment. So we'll wait and see on that one. I do think that fundamentally that the governor has said on many occasions that he believes these are fundamental constitutional rights, and that he'll veto any efforts to restrict those rights. And I suspect he'll get full support from the caucuses in the House and the Senate to support him in his vetoes.
Oh yeah, I think so. As long as he vetoes them, I think we're safe. But I know that there's going to be like a red flag bill, which on paper sounds really nice, because on paper it's like communism. On paper it sounds really good.
Tell the folks at home, just in a nutshell. Red flag bill.
Red flag bill has been tried and is being used in other parts of the country, and what it means is I'm neighbors to Greg, and I say, you know, I call the cops and say, you know, Greg's been acting really weird lately, and I think he's drinking too much, and so the cops go and check out his house, and it's kind of messy and stuff, and so a complaint's filed, and they say, well, Greg, you know, we don't know what's going on, but we're just going to take your firearms for a month. We'll get you evaluated, then you can have everything's copacetic, we'll give you your guns back. Well, fundamentally, you violated his constitutional rights because he has a right to bear arms, and you can't take away somebody's rights without due process.
Right. There's obviously Fifth and 14th Amendment considerations as well as the Second.
Yeah.
So I think that those types of discussions are gonna get down to the granular level. Probably not in your committee of judiciary. Probably over in criminal justice.
Yeah, that would be criminal justice.
And I think that a lot of these types of discussions that take place, particularly around things like domestic violence, temporary restraining orders, and things like that, because certainly a lot of people have complained about the process as far as due process when it comes to temporary restraining orders, when it comes to domestic violence or alleged domestic violence. And there's a very important distinction, because that's sort of taking that sort of philosophy of take the firearms first, ask questions later, and expanding it out to a whole host of other possible possible things such as perceived mental health issues or anger management issues or things like that. And fundamentally, there needs to be, I think, I suspect that all these red flag laws are going to ultimately get litigated up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is going to be there's going to be a standard. But until that happens, people are going to start passing these laws, which, frankly, I think it'll be an open question as to whether or not they will withstand constitutional scrutiny, because we have due process within the New Hampshire Constitution too. So they can be litigated both at the state level, which is a lot faster, or at the federal level as far as some of those.
We got a phone call from Joker. This has got to be good.
So, yeah, just those red
The
flag
Joker?
laws, really, the Joker, I hope so. I mean, gee whiz. Conjecture from a layperson that an individual is unstable has grounds to take away their constitutional rights. That's strange. Okay, we've got Joker calling in. We'd like to welcome the Joker to our show.
The Joker or Joker?
Well, our view
No,
screen says Joker.
it's a very seriously question.
Did we get that right? Wanted to give you a chance to
No.
have your say. Okay,
That other
help
kid
us
was a
out.
clown, man.
Help us out.
All right, so you're talking about gun control.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
All right. So what I don't understand is how they're taking the gun control away.
Excuse me?
Expand on that
Yeah.
question, if you would.
What?
Expand on that question, if you would.
You're talking about gun control, how they're taking our amendments away.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right, now what party is that? Which is taking our rights off of that?
That's the proposed legislation in the New Hampshire legislature that's being introduced right now. There's a red flag law, and I think a couple others.
There's at least one what we call LSR, legislative service request, which is the formative state of a piece of legislation designed to reverse
Do you
constitutional.
have any idea, who was part of that?
Not yet. When it's an LSR, it's still in formulation, and the various reps that might have a chance to co-sponsor a bill once it becomes a bill haven't had that chance yet. So an LSR is essentially a baby bill. It's in formulation, and it's being crafted. The language is being crafted at that stage.
Can I get my input on who might have an idea from that?
Okay, make it quick,
Sure.
please.
Mike Sarge Riley, because he sucks.
Okay.
All right, that's enough.
We appreciate the opinion.
I don't know what Mike Sarge Riley did to this
I
individual.
don't even know who he is.
But he obviously has made an impact on him.
This is
got him upset.
this is the second call from Richard, a.k.a. the Joker,
Joker.
who wants us to know how unpopular somebody named Mike is with him personally. And I don't know if this is necessarily the forum to air those personal opinions, but so
No.
be it. We appreciate your weighing in.
Yeah, so-
After all, it is public television.
So anyway, they have right now, like Greg was saying, they have LSRs, which are legislative service requests. It's basically any legislator right now who has been has won the election in November 6th has the opportunity to introduce legislation, and we already know of a few. A red flag bill, like you said.
Just to be clear, all we have at this point is a title of the bill. We don't have a chance to read the actual
Right. The
contents
details,
of the bill.
yeah.
So as Eric said, it's a baby bill.
Yeah. So,
it's-
but we know this is coming down the pike in January. A lot of Democrats tried, even when it was Republican controlled, to introduce legislation to curb people's Second Amendment rights, and that they were
Bump stock legislation.
bump stock legislation. Yeah, there was all kinds of stuff.
Right,
There's
right.
going to be a whole litany of them this time.
which I'm trying to understand at a time when people can essentially 3D print, basically print their own firearms and or bump stocks. You have to wonder about, from a long-term perspective, what the consequences of these types of things are, and ultimately, where we're going in a long-term perspective, because technology is rapidly sort of outstripping the regulatory process. So I think that when we're thinking about these types of bills, I think that we think about a legislative or a statutory scheme, as we call it, and trying to figure out how that plays forward 10, 20 years when who knows what the impacts would be. Pretty soon, 3D printing will be at a point, I think, where you could probably print your own firearm in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, the reason the red flag bills bother me specifically is because on paper, if people get their information from places like CNN, on paper they sound reasonable. If your neighbor's unstable, this gives you an opportunity to say something. They get the guns away. They go through a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist says, no, he's not that bad, and they give them the guns back. But here's the caveat. First, like we've already said, your constitutional rights have been violated because somebody has a negative opinion of you. Also, a lot in certain places where these red flag bills have been implemented, the local police department's responsible for caring for your firearms. And some of them charge $10, $20 a day to store your firearms. So if that's a month has gone by, you could owe the local police department twice as much as a gun's worth to get it back.
Which means you have to relinquish it ultimately.
So basically, yeah. I mean, if you get a 10/22 that's worth $200 and you owe the local PD, $300 to get it back, then what are you going to do? You go just buy a new one.
What a great scheme. I mean, I foresee with basically what I've heard so far, and I had heard just topically about red flag proposals, but now that you've both elucidated a little bit, I foresee an avalanche of unintended consequences and flagrant abuses in places where these rules are implemented, potentially, because, and I've seen it in the family court system, which is completely unrelated, but I've seen
It's the
abuses
same kind
take
of-
place.
It's the same scheme, same sort of scheme.
Well, yeah, an
A
allegation is made.
statutory scheme.
Precisely, yeah. So somebody declares discomfiture with the behavior of another person. Now that person is presumed problematic, and they're consequenced as such, and they're consequenced in ways sometimes that really restrict their fundamental rights. In the case of family court, of course, it's potentially their custodial rights and what have you, or their right of free movement and free association. With a red flag item, however, this comes closer to home because now in your own sanctuary, you're treated as if you're somehow suspect and deserving of scrutiny, of heightened scrutiny, from third parties, the agendas of whom, who knows what they're about.
They might intend to do you harm once you're disarmed.
Well, who knows? But it opens up a Pandora's box that it sends my constitutional alarm bells off crazy.
Well, there's the other variable too, is that okay, so I called up because Greg's acting weird and I don't trust him with guns, so I call up. Does that hit the newspaper? Greg Moore, his guns have been removed for him because he might be unstable. Okay, now what does that do if you're looking for a job in 2 years? Even though 30 days later they found nothing wrong, and that the guy that made the allegation just didn't like you. Now you've got this scar on your reputation for something that was never legitimate to begin with.
And what are the consequences for filing a false report? What are the?
There's never been any. They do false reports all the time. That's
Right.
part of the problem. Women make false reports against guys in like he said, in domestic disputes, and there's no consequence.
There's no consequence at all, not held accountable. And it's not just women, it's just people will make use of these provisions that are well-intended.
Yes.
Purpose to protect folks that are legitimately at risk. And then they'll take them and use them to their advantage in order to gain some type of statutory or strategic advantage in a larger context.
I gotta know what's going on with your damn fingernails. That's just so
well,
weird. Okay,
well, this is the thing.
Okay,
This is
so
like,
he's been
you can
gone.
take the guns away now because
No. He's been gone for like 3 weeks because
Well, we just had Halloween, and I was in New York for a film festival, and in Halloween it may as well be Mardi Gras or Fantasy Fest at Key West. Halloween, New York just just is quite a place
Anyway,
to be.
So you
So
went
I-
to your award ceremony or the award.
I just
thing.
decided to like the color, so I left it. But we had it. We had a film festival in New York called the World Film Fair, which is no small thing to get into because we had won Best Picture at a smaller festival in L.A.
Yeah.
That got us in, and they can.
Oh, you won the one in L.A.?
We won the one in L.A. and it's called the Blastoff Film Festival. Interesting name. Great guy that runs it, though. He's South African by heritage, and he lives in L.A. now, and he's really savvy in the business. So anyway, that was an honor. That got us considered by the folks in New York, Madrid, Sao Paulo, and London, which is the World Film Fair. It's a fairly new thing, but it's growing.
Yeah.
And they accepted us, and they screened us in New York City. So I went down there. It happened to have been Halloween time, so we kind of mixed it up a little bit.
Yeah, so you went down there,
Yeah.
and then there was something up here in Concord, because last
Yeah, a
week...
couple of weeks later. Sorry to segue away from it.
No, I
Go for
got
it.
to
This
find
is
out
probably
why.
fabulously more interesting.
Very well, fabulous is the key word.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah,
Totally fabulous.
you gotta say it right. Yeah. No, it's neat when you work as an artist. You know, regardless of what you do, whether you're a sculptor or you carve ice with a chainsaw. The fact is, when people recognize eyeballs and eardrums, pay attention to what you do.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice to get noticed.
It is wicked cool. That's why I
and,
wanted you to talk about it.
Yeah, it's and sometimes commercial success follows, and most of the time it doesn't. But if creating stuff that matters is in your DNA, then
There's an
should do it.
entrepreneurial spirit of artists that I
Truly.
think is great, and I think that this all feeds back to a lot of the stuff we're talking about. We began the show talking about Thanksgiving and a lot of the precepts of socialism, if not communism, that sort of were brought initially by the Pilgrims
Yeah.
in 1621.
it's a neat segue.
And
Just did
I
there.
think
Really
that
impressive.
that getting back to that entrepreneurial spirit, that the idea of free markets capitalism embraces that, not just with people making money, but also with artists and
Innovation.
innovation.
Yeah.
And artists are innovators by necessity, and
By
there's a
by
sort
definition, yeah.
they embrace not only the idea of entrepreneurialism, but also what Schumpeter called creative destruction, right? So
Sure.
destroy what you did and then start anew. And I think that's really in many cases what we should be looking at when we're considering Thanksgiving. What does it mean? And a lot of the opportunities that we have here in the U.S. have been driven by creatively destroying that which was before, and embracing that idea of allowing people to have that innovative spirit that government tends to often do a lot more to interfere with than to help.
Yeah.
And,
Well-intentioned though it may be at the time.
absolutely. I mean,
However.
listen. The automobile has been a fantastic invention. It has remarkably improved the lives of hundreds of millions of Americans through the years. But it was murder in the horse and buggy industry, and we have to just say, hey, look, that's the way it works. And communism and socialism doesn't get you to that area. So we should be thankful for is the spirit that came out of the
agree with
Pilgrims realizing that this might not be the best strategy long term.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things I was at the Paul's on line one, but I'm going to hold off on that because we're almost out of time. So thank you, Paul, for calling.
Our apologies, Paul. Only have so much time on the air. We appreciate your effort.
I was out, and my brothers were kind enough to take me to Vegas. I had never been to Vegas.
Oh.
I had never really had a desire to go to Vegas. And I went and saw the Circus du
Cirque du Soleil. Yeah.
Circus Soleil. Okay, it was phenomenal.
Which one? Which theme?
Oh,
this one?
Beatles.
No kidding. Wow,
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So it was absolutely phenomenal. You're watching this and the intricacies of the stagecraft, because stages are constantly moving, and people are walking out. They're pacing themselves, walking out onto the stage. I'm sure they're being blinded by certain lights, and the stage is just coming up to meet their feet, almost as they're walking on top of it, and it's. And that type of thing, and the acrobats and all that stuff is just so amazing. It is so profoundly beautiful.
Yeah.
But I know that if it wasn't for capitalism, it would not exist. Because the amount of time and energy and work that is required to get that kind of intricacy created requires a lot of money.
Well, labor
Right.
is time.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
therefore its value, because time's the one currency you can't get
In
back.
communism, you can't motivate people by telling you, well, go and do this.
Right, but it's also
know,
a
it's-
case. It's also a case. You have to understand that happiness, that inspiration, that innovation, is something that has to happen at a personal level. Government can't decide for you what's going to make you happy.
Right.
And so when government tries to decide what's going to make you happy, or
safe.
cultural institutions, because it really wasn't a government per se with the Pilgrims, cultural institutions try to decide what will bring you happiness, they always fail, because they can never meet what you decide intrinsically is going to bring you happiness. And so we need to have a society that allows people to flourish and embrace that happiness and seek it out for themselves. And whenever we have the sort of the audacity and lack the humility to think that other people might have a better idea what's best for them, that's usually when we fail as a society and as a government.
You know what I find is
It's
almost
very quotable right there. Well done. Yeah, I agree.
what I find it's almost insane is the Hollywood almost not exclusively, but much of Hollywood is totally socialistic, and they
Some.
I'm saying most. I'm not taking all, but most.
Okay.
That they're the ones who provided Beto or whatever his name that ran against Ted Cruz
Right, Beto O'Rourke.
$67 million to try to beat Ted Cruz. $67 million. So the same people who only exist because of capitalism are trying to destroy it. To me, that's profound. That they're trying to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, and they never participate in their own cause. Like, in other words, you don't have somebody that's one of these profound socialists, like what's the singer's name, Barbara Streisand. She doesn't just hand out her money to everybody and live in a cottage. If she really believed in her rhetoric, she would just take her money. She'd have enough money so she could live in a cottage comfortably for the rest of her life and give it out to all the people that she thinks needs help. But they don't do that.
No, frankly, again, there's a degree of arrogance to use somebody else, because at the end of the day, government has a monopoly on force, and the only way you're going to get people to give up that money.
That's why we have the Second Amendment. They don't have a monopoly.
Well, they have the monopoly on
Force of law.
Force of law.
Okay.
So they have that monopoly, and they want somebody else to use their guns to point at somebody's head to give up something that they don't want to give up.
Correct.
And they're not comfortable doing it themselves, but they are comfortable using government to basically point a gun at our heads if we don't do what they tell us to do.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to basically embrace the idea that if you think it's something's a great idea, you should start by doing it yourself, and stop the idea that you have other people with guns do it on your behalf.
I think too also is people don't. I think there's people who are down and out look to people who are wealthy and think there's a jealousy there. There's a us and them syndrome, and I don't
Class
think
envy.
class envy, but they don't understand the work that
Avarice.
went into it. Like my favorite co-host said, because of the things he's done, his passion for his art, if he all of a sudden just became this, started making bazillions of dollars for producing movies because he's really good at it, nobody would ever see all the years he spent toiling, getting almost nothing for it. They don't see that. All they see is the result of the hard work. They don't see the hard work.
The overnight sensation, decades in the making.
I'm
Yeah,
about
decades,
35
exactly.
years into this overnight success, this mythic event that I keep hearing about.
But anyway, Thanksgiving is about thanking God for all this. I mean, when we're talking about capitalism and how poor people are, remember when you see the people protesting because they're down and out, they're sitting there with a $200 or $1,000 cell phone telling you how bad they have it. Okay, they don't. Nobody in this country has it really that bad. The only ones that I know have it bad are some veterans who are homeless because of post-traumatic stress and things like that. But for the most part, 99% of the population is far wealthier than any other population in the world. There are people who are wealthy in other countries that don't have as much as the poor people in the United States. We are profoundly lucky. We're lucky to have such an awesome country founded on great principles, and we should be very thankful to God this Thanksgiving.
Still a land of opportunity.
It still is.
And happy Thanksgiving to you, Gary and Eric.
Happy
Greg,
Thanksgiving.
thanks
And
for
to the
coming.
listeners, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Thanks for sharing so many
When are you
of your,
getting rich anyway? Is that next week?
your
or-
sage views. I genuinely enjoy listening to your civic outlook on things because you tend to put things very succinctly and in a colloquial way that anybody could grasp. And, it really gets a person thinking about how best things ought to be done. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that a great deal.
What?
It's not about the rich part. It's about the.
As far as I'm concerned, the
must-
only
Art.
reason
It's the art.
You
the
must,
only
you must
reason-
worship
no,
my
The
erudition.
only reason I like you as a co-host is I figure one day he's gonna get super rich.
Yeah, he told me once he wanted to be what was it? He said pool boy or something like that.
Pool boy,
which was a little
yes.
sketchy
I
sounding.
want to
over
be
the
his
phone,
pool boy when
Cabana
he's
boy.
got this.
but- Yeah, cabana boy. It's just,
So, hey,
I'll,
see you guys next
I'll
week.
hold auditions. How's that? Happy holidays, folks.